Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss the module Habermas Critical Theory of Knowledge in the paper Epistemology. This module is written by C.B. George of IIT Bombay. I am Raghuram Raju from University of Hyderabad. Habermas is part of this very important school called Frankfurt School, or the critical school, along with Adorno, Horkheimer, and many other people. The Frankfurt School is known for coming up with a very important point, and that is that the contemporary events that happened in 20th century are related to certain aspects of enlightenment. They came up with this idea, with this thesis, that enlightenment, which was thought to be an emancipatory project, came up with, issued out, gave rise to newer forms of unreason and unfreedom. This is a big and very shocking admission. In other words, something that was projected as emancipatory in turn came to be subjugative, and that was something which was pointed out by Frankfurt schools. What distinguishes Habermas from others in the Frankfurt school is that Habermas did not reject the Enlightenment projects while accepting the fact that it gave rise to new forms of unreason and unfreedom. He characterized the subsequent developments of Enlightenment as Enlightenment derailed rather than defects in Enlightenment. So he said that instead of rejecting Enlightenment, which was at one point of time seen as an emancipatory project, we need to look at how it got derailed on the way of its journey. So he made a strong plea for returning to the emancipatory concerns of the project of Enlightenment and proposed what can be called as a revisionary project of Enlightenment. So he tried to revive the Enlightenment project, taking note of the defects that were associated with Enlightenment, rightly pointed out by others in the Frankfurt School. So he offers, for instance, a different idea of rationality, broader than the one which is available in Enlightenment. As you all know, that Enlightenment came up with the idea of reason, which is instrumental, or what is called as instrumental rationality. In contrast, Habermas offered what is called as communicative rationality, and he said that rationality is possibly inherent in the ordinary language of our common life world. So it is not that there is a disembodied reason, but reason is embodied in our ordinary language of our common life world. That's the important point made by Habermas. While accepting the importance of the techno-rationality, Habermas's main concern is to retrieve the lost prestige of non-technical scientific context and actions, especially the social and political ones, which were neglected by the Enlightenment project. So you see that Habermas sought to find a middle path between the pure historicism or relativism on the one hand and the pure transcendentalism or absolutism on the other hand. So you have Habermas, who is accepting the importance of the techno-scientific body of knowledge, techno-scientific body of resources, and techno-scientific notion of rationality, which is the instrumental rationality. He, at the same time, he says that you have to factor to the ordinary aspects of human existence and the language that people speak in society and cultures. So this he undertook through language and communication. So he said like that there is an autonomous individual who is an important person, and we achieved a lot in instituting the centrality of human existence and rejecting God-centeredness which was there at that time. But the human being should not be taken as autonomous and solipsistic. Autonomy does not mean solipsism. Autonomy means that you also have to look at that person engaging with other human beings, and that is possible through the engagement of language. And what do you do with language? You don't just speak to yourself. Language is meant for communication, and communication involves the other person. So now you find that the stage is set where Habermas is not talking like Descartes, where the discussion is about one individual and the objects which he cognizes or she cognizes. No, he's not talking like contract philosophers who are talking about a communication between one autonomous individual and another autonomous individual in a contractarian and a very hypothetical state of society. What he's talking about is the individuals are there. Individualism is important, and this is is a fruit of long battle human beings has waged against the orthodoxy, against religiosity, against tradition. That is important, but please remember that individual is not in isolation, is not autonomous in the sense of bracketing off, excluding oneself from other human beings. That individual participates in language, engages in communication. So now you have, for instance, in between individual and individual, and they are imbricated, or they participate in a larger framework called society and culture. So let us look at how Habermas embarks on this project of restating the Enlightenment project, which he agrees got derailed, and then see what are the details that he offers in support of the way in which he builds out an alternative case for the Enlightenment. Against positivism and scientism, Habermas argues that knowledge does not arise neutrally. Okay, it is not that there is knowledge and then you can make use of that knowledge. Okay. He says that the beginning of knowledge is always associated with the human interest. Okay. There is no knowledge that is neutral. There is no knowledge that is disengaged from human interests. Now, since there are several human interests and there are different human interests, there are several human interests and there are different human interests, and these several human interests and different human interests are rooted in socio-cultural forms of life. Now look at the kind of a range of things that are there in front of a human being who acquires knowledge. So all these factor, all these contribute to the knowledge production. Independent of this, he would not look at knowledge. That's the point that is important to note. For instance, if you follow scientism, the scientific attitude towards knowledge would be that we are interested in looking at the knowledge for the sake of knowledge in an objective way. Okay, and then this knowledge may be useful, and we don't know how many ways the knowledge will be useful. That generally in conventional terminology is in the hands of technology. So they would say that there is a contingent relation between science and technology. Scientific knowledge is not bothered about the uses of that knowledge. The uses are in the hands of a different discipline called technology. They will take over that. Habermas would not accept something like this. He says that it is the different interests, several interests rooted in different social cultural matrix. All of them provide the background to a person to have knowledge. So there is already, a social background, social background for your acquiring knowledge. So in other words, knowledge is closely associated with the human interest. As I said, human interests are not just innumerable, and they are not fixed, they are not homogeneous, they are not in one place, they are all over. Okay, they are several, they are not just several, they are different. They are not just different, they are also rooted in socio-cultural forms of life. But if they are several, they are different, and they are rooted in socio-cultural matrix, though rooted in social cultural forms of life, one can still talk about truth of knowledge. So knowledge does not become or is not confined to the society and cultures. One can still talk about truth of the knowledge, even though there is this background to the knowledge that Habermas talks about. And a possibility of making truth claims is possible, according to Habermas, because of speech and action. So when as a communicating person, I am not merely entrenched in my own conditions, not even dictated merely by my interest. The interests are there. I have interest, and they are several, and they are different, and they are rooted in society and culture. But this ability of human being to speak, to communicate, to act, they are the ones which make me to transcend my subjectivity and move towards the claims of objectivity. When I speak, I don't make sense only to myself. I make sense to the other. How do I make sense to the other? Not because that person is like me, or that person understands me from his own point. He is able to access, or she is able to access me, because there is something which is common, which is truth, which is not merely dependent on me. It is this common denominator, common arena, common aspect that makes one person to reach out to the other person through speech and action. So there are two important aspects in human being, namely speech and action, who not only relate me to my context, to my interest, but also make me to transcend and reach out to the other person. So he says that speech and action are not merely subjective, nor merely mechanical things. They involve others and are processed through intersubjectivity. Habermas, in this context, identifies three fundamental interests that drive knowledge. Why do we seek knowledge? Why do we have knowledge? The first one is nature is the material base of life. Nature is and can be transformed into artifacts in some way. Okay, there is a nature and it has a material base. I see it in front of me. Though I see it in front of me, I have the capacity to transform the nature which is given to me and make artifacts. I can make many objects, many things which I can use. So this is the most important aspect of human existence, human interest. So the human beings have nature in front of them, and they have the capacity to transform these natural objects into artifacts. So there is a deep-seated technical interest at an initial stages within the capacity of human being. Knowledge that is produced objectively has a purpose and instrumental aspect. So this is the point that is very important to Habermas. Human beings have the capacity to manipulate and control nature. So it is in that context nature becomes instrumental because it is based on means and ends. So I use nature as a means to achieve my ends. On this point, Habermas is greatly influenced by the important pragmatist C.S. Peirce. In this context, let us also look at how, for instance, Habermas says that even the spontaneous life, even my spontaneous speech, even my spontaneous activity, actions, are caught up in technical interest of trial and error. So there are many people who say that when I speak spontaneously, I just, it is spontaneous and I don't plan it. No, even spontaneity has trial and error. I say something spontaneously, it doesn't work. Then I say something else spontaneously, it might work. So it is not that everything that is spontaneously is just there and then you leave it at that time. Okay, you can modify, you can come up with alternative spontaneous reactions. That's an important point that is made by Habermas. In the reflective practice of science, these spontaneous experience of technical interest are refined several ways. Let us look at some ways where the technical practice of science refines the spontaneous activities. One is the abstracting, that is real life learning process, and isolating them from life context. I find that there is an incident in my life. Now, it's a part of that life which is related to what happened to me earlier, in relation to others, and what will happen to me in future. So it is completely, imbricated within that matrix of intersubjectivity with my past and things like that. But please remember that I can use that incident, I can take it out of my context and lose it somewhere else. Like for instance, to take this example, that there are something like idioms in language. Idioms are those that can make sense in the text, also outside that context. Okay, so that they are called idioms. So like that, I have the capacity where something that happened in my own life, I can abstract it, take it out of the context and then use it somewhere else. That is an ability where I interfere and I modified, I change. The second thing is I can make them precise and predictable for intersubjective reliability and measurement. Something happened in this classroom. Okay, I can just, I might have said something, in a spontaneous way, and it just came to me as I'm, talking to the camera. I'm talking to you, But then it is not very, very precise. It is spontaneous. It is a bit rough, and has some rough edges. It is not very clear. I can go back and sit in my room and then recollect this. I'll relook at my notes and then make what I reacted spontaneously precise. Make a formula out of it. I refine it. I can, make it very crisp. And then I can then use it in a predictable way in my next class. So you know what is happening now? Something happened spontaneously. It is good, it is novel, very interesting, but it is not very, very crisp at that time. So I take that idea and then rework on it, make it crisp, and then in my next appearance, in my next class, I might use it in a predictable way. At that time, I don't do it in a spontaneous way. I do it in a very predictable way. Now, this is something that I can, do as a human being. At that time, in fact, my predictability is such that I can measure the kind of impact that I want to receive or, get from my audience. So predictability and then the measurability are something that I can do in addition to or adding to the spontaneity activity of mine. Further, I can systematize the process of knowledge cumulatively and fit them into theoretical systems. So once I talk to you and I find that there's some idea that came to my mind in a very spontaneous way, then I take it to my room and then make it very crisp and then use it in a planned way in my next class. Okay, that's Okay, that's possible. I can also get a kind of a impact from the class students about the idea that I elaborated in a very predictable way. But then I can then go on, if it is an interesting idea, and make a big system out of that idea. I write a paper for publication. I write a book for publication. Now you understand that a lot of things are, are added or added to the something that happened in a predictable way. Okay, this is the point that Habermas makes, saying that even spontaneous activities are capable of several modifications in communication, in intercommunication, in an intersubjective way, when I participate with others in society and in different cultures. The interests are practical, not merely abstract interest. The practical interests are based on reliability of intersubjective communication in ordinary language that feeds our social life. Our individuality itself, says Habermas, is made in communicative nature and social relations, both empirical analytical, that is instrumental action, and hermeneutic action. So one of the important aspects of Habermas is that he doesn't reject the technical or empirical or scientific notions of knowledge. He says they're important, they should be there. In addition to that, there is the social and hermeneutical aspect of knowledge which you should not abandon, as seems to be the case with the earlier project of modernity, early project of enlightenment. That's the important fact that Habermas brings into the discussion. So according to Habermas, our actions and our interests are not only self-generated, they also have an emancipatory aspect, role to play. Two, in addition to the controlled interest of the natural sciences, the meaning interest of the cultural sciences are important. In addition to that, he adds that freedom interest of the social sciences and critical theories are also important. So you have the controlled interest of the natural sciences, meaning interest of the cultural sciences, and freedom interest of the social sciences, which are emancipatory. Okay, this has ideology and things like that come under this. In addition to that, he also says how important is psychoanalysis in liberating us from the kind of biases, kind of problems that civilizations put on us, particularly on our sexual behavior and things like that. So it is in this context you look at Habermas as a one who rejects this subjectivism or the representationalism of the philosophy of consciousness and offers the theory of communicative competence and subjectivity, where there is a possibility of consensus and a dominant free communication. Now there is a point that many critics have pointed out. Yes, Habermas is talking about communication. Is not communication not only liberative but also oppressive? Isn't the case that there are some speakers who, using their expertise, dominate the others in that community? Isn't language used not merely to express ideas, to liberate people, but also to dominate them? But Habermas would say that dominant communication is not acceptable. We should reject that. We should see that communication is free from domination. According to Habermas, there is a close relation between knowledge and rationality. Rationality in an expanded sense. He would not accept rationality as the instrumental rationality of the Cartesian type. He would suggest the rationality has an expanded horizon and uses it in an expanded sense. He would, as I said right in the beginning, use rationality as part of a language in communication. So he would say that we should actually know, when you enter into communication, there are certain acceptable conditions. One is that communication has to have argumentativeness. Nothing should be accepted just as a belief because somebody said with authority or as a blind belief. No, neither authority nor belief should be allowed in communication. you should be open for argumentation. And then another important point that he makes is that there is this cooperative condition of truth, that two people who are in communication and more than two people who are in communication should be in a cooperative mood of exploring knowledge, of finding out truth. So for him, that knowledge is not merely meaning, but makes meaningfulness in social context. That's the important thing. So knowledge is not merely empirical, analytical, it has an emancipatory role. Communication is a coercive, free, and it is done in a free environment. Though there is this intersubjectivity, the coercion should be free from coercion. So one of the important aspects of Habermas is that he tries to provide in between the philosophy of consciousness and decentering of self, which are the two extremities, in locating the self within the matrix of language and communication. That is his larger contribution. Thank you.